The sound of breaking glass shattered the silence of our home. I stood frozen in our dimly lit living room, watching as my husband Tom stumbled through the front door, his eyes glazed with anger and alcohol. The clock on the wall showed 2 a.m., and I knew tonight was different from his usual late returns. "What are you still doing awake?" he slurred, throwing his keys onto the coffee table. They missed, clattering across the hardwood floor. "Always watching, always waiting. Like some kind of guard dog." "I was worried about you," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. "You weren't answering your phone." He laughed, but it wasn't the warm laugh I fell in love with 3 years ago. This laugh was cold, almost cruel. "Worried?" "No, you were checking up on me. That's what you do, isn't it, Sarah? Always checking, always controlling." I stepped back as he moved closer, the smell of whiskey heavy on his breath. "Tom, please. You're drunk. Let's just go to bed, and we can talk in the morning." "Don't tell me what to do," he roared, sweeping his arm across the counter. Our wedding photo crashed to the ground, glass splintering across the floor like tiny stars. "This is my house, mine. And I'm sick of you acting like you run things around here." My heart pounded against my ribs as I backed away, my bare feet careful to avoid the glass. "Tom, you're scaring me." "Scaring you?" His voice dropped dangerously low. "You haven't seen scary yet." He grabbed the half-empty whiskey bottle from his jacket pocket. "I want you out. Now." "This is my home too," I whispered, feeling tears well up in my eyes. "Please, let's just." The bottle flew past my head, smashing against the wall behind me. I couldn't hold back my scream as drops of whiskey and glass rained down. Tom's face twisted with rage as he stormed toward me, grabbing my arm with bruising force. I said, "Get out." He dragged me toward the door, my feet stumbling over the shattered glass. Pain shot through my feet as tiny shards dug into my skin. "Tom, stop. You're hurting me." I struggled against his grip, but years of construction work had made him too strong. With one powerful shove, I was outside on the cold October night, wearing nothing but my pajamas. The door slammed behind me, the lock clicking with finality. I stood there, shaking, my feet bleeding, as the reality of what just happened washed over me. But something else was rising inside me, too. Something stronger than fear. As I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers to call my sister Amy, I felt it growing determination. Tom thought this was the end of our story, but he was wrong. This was just the beginning. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I was 29 when I married the man I thought was my soulmate. Now, at 32, I'm standing outside the home we built together, locked out and bleeding. But this isn't a story about being a victim. This is a story about finding strength in the darkest moments, about rising up when someone tries to break you down. 3 years ago, I was a successful real estate agent in Houston, living my best life with a great group of friends and a growing career. Then I met Tom at a charity golf event. He was charming and successful and looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. His smile could light up a room, and his confidence was magnetic. Everyone loved Tom, my friends, my family, even my overprotective older sister. Our whirlwind romance felt like a fairy tale. Fancy dinners, surprise weekend getaways, thoughtful little gifts just because. When he proposed after a year of dating, I didn't hesitate to say yes. The warning signs were there. Looking back now, the way he'd get jealous when I talked to male clients, how he'd make little comments about my clothes or my friends. But love has a way of blinding you to the red flags. As I stand here in the cold, watching my breath form little clouds in the air, I realize something important. Tonight isn't just about survival, it's about taking back control. Tom thinks he's broken me, but he has no idea what I'm capable of. As my sister's car pulls up to the curb, headlights cutting through the darkness, I make a promise to myself. This is the last night I'll ever let anyone make me feel powerless. Little did Tom know, he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Sometimes, when you push someone too far, you create something stronger than you ever imagined. And I was about to show him exactly what that meant. The first 6 months of our marriage were everything I'd dreamed of. Tom was attentive and loving, and seemed to want nothing more than my happiness. We moved into a beautiful 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood, complete with a wraparound porch I'd always wanted. Every morning, he'd kiss me goodbye before heading to his construction site, and every evening, he'd come home with stories about his day. "You know what, babe," he said one evening as we sat on our new porch swing. "You don't need to keep working. I make enough for both of us." He squeezed my hand gently. "Besides, real estate takes up so much of your time. Wouldn't it be nice to focus on making this house a real home?" I hesitated, running my fingers along the rim of my wine glass. "I love my job, Tom. I'm good at it." The commission from my last sale had paid for most of our furniture. His smile tightened slightly. "I just hate seeing you stressed about showings and open houses. Remember last week? You missed our dinner with my parents because of that last-minute client." "That was a one-time thing," I protested, but he was already shaking his head. "Sarah, honey, I want to take care of you. Let me do that. Just try it for a few months. If you don't like it, you can always go back." Looking back now, I should have seen it for what it was, the first thread being pulled in the unraveling of my independence. But his words were coated with love and concern, and I wanted to be a good wife. 2 weeks later, I submitted my resignation. The changes were subtle at first. Tom suggested I keep track of my spending using a shared app, just so we can budget better. He mentioned that my friend Lisa seemed to call it inconvenient times. He bought me beautiful new clothes, somehow always picking sizes slightly too small. "You'd look amazing in this once you lose a few pounds," he'd say, holding up a designer dress. "We should start going to the gym together." Then came the comments about my cooking. "My mom always makes her lasagna with homemade noodles," he'd say, pushing his plate away. Or, "Don't you think you should have started dinner earlier? I'm starving when I get home." I threw myself into being the perfect housewife, desperate to make him happy. I learned to cook his favorite meals, kept the house spotless, and started working out every day. But somehow, it was never quite enough. One evening, I invited Lisa over for coffee. We hadn't seen each other in weeks, and I missed our talks. Tom came home early. "Oh, I didn't know we had company," he said, his voice pleasant but his eyes cold. After Lisa left, he exploded. "I work all day to provide for us, and I come home to find you gossiping like teenagers? Did you even think about dinner?" I was going to order, I started, but he cut me off. "Order? With what money, Sarah?" "My money." He ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "You know what? Just don't have people over without asking me first. This is my house too." I nodded, fighting back tears. That night, as I lay awake listening to his steady breathing beside me, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd decided without wondering how Tom would react. My phone buzzed less frequently these days. Friends stopped calling after one too many canceled plans. Even Amy, my sister, had grown distant. "I just worry about you," she'd said during our last conversation. "You're not the same person anymore." "Don't be dramatic," I'd replied, repeating Tom's words without even realizing it. "I'm happier than ever." But was I? The woman who used to close million-dollar deals and go dancing with her friends now spent hours agonizing over whether the bathroom was clean enough or if dinner would be ready at exactly 6:30. The breaking point started building on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. I was folding laundry when I found a receipt in Tom's pocket: dinner for two at an expensive restaurant downtown, from a day he'd told me he was working late. My hands shook as I stared at the paper, memories of his recent late nights and strange phone calls flooding back. I wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but fear held me back. When had I become so afraid of my husband? The receipt felt like a burning coal in my pocket. As I prepared his favorite dinner, my mind racing with questions I didn't dare ask. Little did I know, that receipt would become my first piece of evidence, the first step toward reclaiming my life. Because sometimes the thing that breaks you can also be the thing that sets you free. That receipt became my secret obsession. I started paying more attention, noticing patterns I'd been too afraid to see. Tom's late nights at work always seemed to fall on Thursdays. His phone would go silent during those hours, texts unanswered until he came home smelling of unfamiliar cologne. I began keeping a diary, hidden inside an old cookbook. Small things at first: dates, times, unexplained expenses. But soon, I was documenting more. October 3rd, Tom threw his plate in the sink because the chicken was too dry, called me useless. October 10th, grabbed my arm during an argument about money. Left bruises. October 15th, found another receipt. Women's jewelry store. My hands trembled as I wrote each entry, but something inside me was finally waking up. The real estate agent I used to be would never have tolerated this. What happened to that woman? The drinking started getting worse too. He'd come home with alcohol on his breath more often, his mood swinging between sickly sweet and thunderously angry. I learned to read the signs: the way he'd fumble with his keys, how his footsteps would drag across the porch. One night, I made the mistake of asking about the late nights. "Are you spying on me now?" His words slurred slightly as he cornered me in the kitchen, going through my things like some desperate housewife. "No, I miss you," I said softly, trying to diffuse his anger. "We barely talk anymore." He laughed, that cruel sound I'd grown to dread. "Maybe if you were more interesting to talk to, I'd want to come home earlier." Each word felt like a slap. I thought about the receipt buried in my cookbook, about the jewelry he'd bought that never made its way to me. "Where were you last Thursday?" The silence that followed was deafening. His face darkened, and for the first time I saw something truly frightening in his eyes. "You don't want to go down this road, Sarah," he growled, stepping closer. Some questions are better left unasked, but something in me had snapped. Maybe it was the months of walking on eggshells, or maybe it was remembering the strong woman I used to be. "I think I deserve to know what my husband does with my money." "Your money?" His voice rose to a shout. "Your money? Who pays the bills here? Who keeps a roof over your ungrateful head?" "I had my own money before you made me quit my job," I shouted back, surprising us both. "I had a life before you decided to control every part of it." The glass he was holding shattered against the wall beside my head. I froze, heart pounding, as whiskey dripped down the wallpaper. "You want to talk about control," he snarled, grabbing my phone from the counter. "Let's see how well you do without this. No more checking up on me. No more questions." My phone cracked against the floor as he stomped on it. I watched, paralyzed, as he destroyed my last connection to the outside world. "Clean this mess up," he ordered, gesturing to the broken glass. "And when I get home tomorrow, we're going to have a serious talk about respect." He stormed out, leaving me standing in a kitchen that suddenly felt like a prison. As I swept up the broken glass, something crystallized inside me. This wasn't just about the other woman anymore. This was about survival. With shaking hands, I retrieved my diary from the cookbook. Flipping through pages of documented abuse and lies, I made a decision. Tonight, I would pack a bag. Tonight, I would use the emergency phone I'd hidden in the garage. Tonight, I would call Amy. But Tom came home early, more drunk than I'd ever seen him. And that's when everything exploded into the scene from the beginning of our story the night he threw me out of my own home. He didn't know that being thrown out wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of his nightmare. Because I had evidence, I had witnesses, and most importantly, I had nothing left to lose. Amy arrived within 15 minutes, but those moments standing barefoot in the cold felt like hours. When her headlights swept across the yard, illuminating my tear-stained face and bleeding feet, she didn't ask questions. She just pulled me into a fierce hug. "We're not going to my apartment," she said firmly as she helped me into her car. "He'll look for you there. We're going to Katie's place." Katie was our cousin who lived 2 towns over. Tom had never met her. He'd always made excuses when it came to my extended family gatherings. Now I understood why. The emergency room was our first stop. As the doctor cleaned the glass from my feet, Amy took photos with her phone. "Evidence," she said simply. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "We're doing this right." I sat there, wrapped in a borrowed hospital blanket, as memories washed over me. The real estate awards gathering dust in our attic. The friends whose calls I'd stopped answering. The savings account I'd closed because Tom said we should pool our resources. "I've been so stupid," I whispered, staring at my bandaged feet. Amy grabbed my hand. "No, you've been abused. There's a difference. But now we're going to fight back." That night at Katie's house, I couldn't sleep. I sat at her kitchen table, drinking tea and making lists. Everything Tom had taken from me. Everything I needed to take back. "First," Amy said, spreading papers across the table, "we document everything." The diary was smart. "We'll need that." Katie, who worked as a paralegal, nodded in agreement. "I know a good lawyer. She specializes in cases like yours." But Sarah, she hesitated. "We need to talk about money." Money. The chain Tom had used to bind me. I took a deep breath. "I have a secret account," I admitted. "I've been putting away small amounts from the grocery money. It's not much, but—" Amy's eyes filled with tears. "You were planning this, not consciously. But I think some part of me knew I'd need an escape route." The next few days were a blur of activity. While Tom blew up Amy's phone with threats and false concerns, we were building my case. Katie's lawyer friend, Maria, took one look at my diary and photos and agreed to help. Financial abuse, emotional manipulation, physical violence, she listed, reviewing my statement. "We're going to need a restraining order." "He'll be furious," I whispered. "Good," Maria replied firmly. "Angry people make mistakes. We'll be ready when he does." We worked methodically. Maria helped me file police reports for the assault and destruction of property. We gathered bank statements showing the pattern of control. Amy reached out to my old friends and colleagues, building a network of witnesses who'd seen the changes in me. Then came the text from Lisa, my old friend. "There's something you should know about Thursday nights." My hands shook as I read her message. Tom had been seeing someone, not just anyone, but a client's wife from my old real estate days. They'd been meeting at the same restaurant where we'd had our first date. "This is good," Maria assured me, adding the evidence to our file. "But Sarah, are you ready for what comes next? Because once we file these papers, there's no going back." I looked at my reflection in Katie's hallway mirror. The bruises were fading, but something in my eyes had changed. The fear was still there, but behind it was a steel I hadn't seen in years. "You know what the worst part was?" I said slowly. "Not the control, not even the cheating. It was watching myself disappear, piece by piece. I want to show everyone that woman isn't gone. She was just waiting." That night, we finalized our plan. In the morning, Tom would be served with divorce papers and a restraining order at his job site. His carefully crafted image of the perfect husband would crumble in front of his coworkers. But that was just the beginning. Because I wasn't just fighting for a divorce, I was fighting for every woman who'd ever felt trapped, every person who'd lost themselves to someone else's control. As I lay in Katie's guest room that night, I remembered something my dad used to say before he passed: "The best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting better." Tom thought he'd broken me that night he threw me out. Instead, he'd set me free. And I was about to show him exactly what freedom looked like. Maria's timing was perfect. She had the papers served during Tom's weekly site meeting, right in front of his entire crew and supervisors. Katie's friend who worked at the construction company texted us the play-by-play. "He's turning purple," she wrote. Just threw his hard hat across the trailer. "Boss isn't looking happy." I should have felt scared, but instead, I felt powerful. For the first time in years, I was the one in control. The calls started within hours. First from Tom, then from his friends, his family. I let them all go to voicemail, saving each threatening message as evidence, but it was his text that showed his true colors. "You think anyone will believe you? I'll tell them what you are, a gold-digging liar who couldn't handle being a real wife. You're nothing without me." I forwarded it to Maria with shaking hands. Not from fear this time, but from anger. "Perfect," she replied. "Keep them coming. He's digging his own grave." Tom's next move was predictable. He froze our joint accounts, but we were ready. I'd already moved my emergency fund to a new bank, and Amy had helped me apply for a temporary job at her office. It wasn't real estate, but it was a start. The real surprise came when Tom's boss called me. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said gruffly. "I've known Tom for 15 years. Never liked him much. Had 3 complaints about his temper this year alone. Whatever you need, witnesses, character statements, just ask." More support came from unexpected places. Former clients reached out with stories of Tom's inappropriate behavior. His ex-girlfriend contacted Maria with her own story of abuse. The perfect image he'd built was cracking, and through those cracks, the truth was pouring out. But Tom had one last card to play. He showed up at Katie's house one night, drunk and raging. "You think you can humiliate me?" he shouted from the driveway. "Come out here and face me, you coward." We stayed inside, recording everything while Katie called the police. As his shouts grew more violent, more threatening, I felt something strange pity. This raging man had once seemed so powerful, so in control. Now he was just pathetic. The police arrived within minutes. Tom's dramatic performance earned him a night in jail and another piece of evidence for our case. His company suspended him the next day. The court date came faster than expected. I sat in the courtroom, surrounded by my support system, Amy, Katie, Lisa, and even Tom's boss. Tom sat alone on his side, his lawyer looking increasingly uncomfortable as Maria presented our evidence. "Your Honor," Maria began, "what we have here is a clear pattern of escalating abuse." She laid it out methodically: the financial control, the isolation, the manipulation, all leading to that final night of violence. Tom's lawyer tried to paint me as materialistic and unstable, but the evidence was too strong. When the judge asked me to speak, I stood tall. My voice didn't shake. 3 years ago, I was a successful real estate agent with my own life, my own dreams. Tom didn't just take those things, he made me believe I didn't deserve them. But standing here today, I know the truth. I deserve everything I lost and more. And I'm taking it all back. The judge's ruling was decisive. Not only did I get the divorce, but also the house, a restraining order, and enough of our assets to restart my life. But the real victory wasn't in the judgment, it was in Tom's face as he realized he'd lost all power over me. As we left the courthouse, Amy squeezed my hand. "What now?" I smiled, feeling the warm sun on my face. "Now, I think it's time to get my real estate license renewed." "Want me to continue with the aftermath and how I rebuilt my life even stronger than before?" Stepping back into my old real estate office felt like coming home. My former broker, Janet, welcomed me with open arms. "The market's missed you," she said, clearing off my old desk. "And frankly, we could use someone with your fire right now." Fire. That's exactly what I have now. Every morning, I walked through the city with new eyes. The buildings weren't just structures anymore, they were possibilities. Each property I showed wasn't just a house, but a potential fresh start for someone else, just like I'd had. The first few months weren't easy. My hands would shake during showings, and sometimes a client's harsh tone would send me spiraling back to those nights with Tom. But now I had tools, support, and most importantly, my voice. "You've changed," Amy said over coffee one morning, 6 months after the divorce. "You're stronger." I stirred my coffee, thinking about everything that had happened. "I'm not stronger," I replied. "I'm just done being weak." My first big sale after returning to work wasn't just a commission, it was redemption. As I handed the keys to a young woman leaving her bad situation, I saw myself in her eyes. "It's scary." Starting over, she whispered during the final walkthrough. I touched her shoulder gently. "Want to know a secret? Starting over is just the first step. The real joy comes in discovering who you can become." Her words spread quickly in our industry. The woman who stood up to Tom Mitchell, who rebuilt her life from scratch. Other women started coming to me not just for houses, but for hope. Each story was different, but the fear in their eyes was the same one I used to see in my mirror. I started a support group that met monthly in my office. From houses to homes, we called it. A safe space for women to talk about rebuilding their lives, their confidence, and their dreams. Some nights we talked about restraining orders and court dates. Other nights we shared job leads and childcare resources. Every night we grew stronger together. 1 year to the day after Tom threw me out, I signed the papers in my place. Not the house we'd shared I'd sold that months ago. This was a small condo overlooking the city park. My furniture, my rules, my life. In that night, I hosted a dinner party. Amy, Katie, Lisa, and all the women who'd helped me through the darkness gathered in my new home. As we shared wine and stories, laughter echoing off the walls, I realized something profound. Tom thought he was destroying me that night he threw me out. Instead, he'd thrown me straight into my destiny. Every cruel word, every controlling act, every moment of fear had become a brick in the foundation of my new life. I keep my diary from those days locked in my desk drawer. Not because I'm afraid anymore, but to remind myself of how far I've come. Sometimes, when I'm showing houses to women with hidden bruises and quiet voices, I share my story. The night my husband threw me out, I tell them, wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of my revolution. They ask me if I'm angry, and if I hate him. The truth is, I don't. Hate requires energy, and I'm too busy living to waste energy on Tom. Last I heard, he'd moved to another state and started over. I hope he's found peace. I know I have. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and this isn't just a survival story. It's a story about resurrection. About the woman who died 1,000 small deaths in a toxic marriage, only to rise from those ashes stronger, wiser, and ready to help others rise too. Because sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that could have happened. Sometimes, being thrown out means finally finding your way home. The end.